Welcome to webinar 36. We're discussing international social work. We have lots of fantastic guests for you tonight, and we have a pretty full room. So I think I'm going to put myself on mute. I'm going to hand over to Kat, who is unmuted, I can see, and is ready to take over. So over to you, Kat.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everybody, and welcome to webinar 36, as Kelly said, International Social Work. We have 6 guests with us tonight talking about their experiences of social work in different parts of the world. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Paula Sepulveda. Sorry, I hope I've said that okay.
It's perfect, Kat. Hello. Hello, everybody. Well, I'm Paula Sepulveda. I'm a feminist social worker. And I want to thank you and all the team and Chima for inviting me. I'm really honored for being here and to celebrate with all of you the World Social Work Day, speaking a little about social work in Chile. Well, Chima spoke last week, among other things, about identity. So I am going to start with a glimpse of the history of social work in Chile, because it's a great part of what I am as social work. And just a little bit. This is Chile. This long land is a country with just over 17 million people spread over more than 4,000 kilometers in length. So in this little country, but long country, in 1925, it was opened the first school of social work in Latin America. Not surprisingly, it had a medical approach. It was only for women and had a philanthropic and charitable character with European influences. However, it had a great impact on the country and in other countries of the region. After many changes, today the Faculty of Social Work at the Universidad Tecnológica Metropolitana, where I studied, is the heir of its legacy. In 1940, the government issued a decree to create and organize state social services schools in Chile. And 10 years later, those schools are incorporated into the University of Chile. With this, the profession formalizes its status as Chile's first university degree in social sciences, which is very important for us. Between 1967 and 1969, started a process of rethinking or reconceptualization, which led to approaches and new perspectives about the global and specific situations of the reality of the country. And also, this led to consider the Latin American context, valuing the idiosyncrasies of each country. Remember, we started with an European from European influences, but from this point, we started to focus more on what's happening in America and Latin America. This was very important, and its impact persists until today. After this, especially during the difficult time of the dictatorship of Pinochet, it was possible to find the profession separated into something that more or less continued to today. On one hand, we have social services, which are more welfare-oriented, focused on individuals and families, and a more bureaucratic work. On the other hand, we have social work in more an ample definition, also preoccupied for the welfare, but not only that, and focus on individuals, families, groups, communities, and within a wider range of issues, using different methods and techniques. Well, what about today? Today, Chile is a country profoundly unequal. We have two faces. A little part of the population have too much, and a big part of the population have too little. In this context, social workers are committed to many issues, as social work justice, social change, diversity, equality, interculturalism, human rights, especially nowadays, women and gender issues, and decolonizing social work, among others. Well, what about me? I was born in Chile, even I live in Spain now. I said I did my bachelor degree there, and I practice. Almost all my practice was there. For 15 years, I worked in private, mostly NGOs, and public institutions too, in different areas. The first one that I want to speak about you is community social work. I was very young and I had a lot to learn, but it was a great experience because I had the opportunity to work with people from different backgrounds and territories that had come to form new neighborhoods, transforming those new neighborhoods into communities by building relationships, confidence, and solidarity. Was it difficult? Yes. I was young and a woman. So some people, especially men, were dismissive sometimes. I needed to gain their confidence without using the professional card. I mean, I couldn't just say, I am the one with the professional knowledge, so you have to listen to me. So I started to listen to the people, I made suggestions, and I looked for allies. I still remember some of the women that started to come together with my colleagues and me, and they were a fundamental part of that process. I also worked with families in context of social work exclusion, of social exclusion. I had to go to their houses every week, not for visiting or inspecting, but to listen, to define objectives with them, to make commitments with them, both parties, I and me. So for 1 hour every week, I was in their homes, feeling the same heat, the same cold, the rain, the smells, the noises, everything. 3 or 4 families every day. It was a great work, but it was hard. And one of the lessons that I learned is that you need to take care of yourself. I agree completely with the idea shared here last week that we are not heroes or superheroes. And I learned that the bad way because I burned out. I couldn't separate the work from the personal feelings. Finally, one of my latest jobs was working in violence against women in partner relationships. For me, this was a life-changing work. First, because it was a wonderful team of women working together, psychologists, attorneys, social workers, volunteers. So we work together to help other women to break the cycle of the gender violence, also to prevent those situations, conducting awareness raising workshops with people all of ages, from schools to older people. It was wonderful. And doing networks with other institutions and groups, trying to connect to raise the awareness also in this situation, against this situation. It was, for me, the most difficult job that I have had, but brought great rewards. As professor, I am now a professor at the University of Cadiz in Spain. Is one of the topics that I teach, and I also research about it, especially violence against older women in their partners' relationships. Well, I would like to finish with something that was written by one of my professors when I was a student a long time ago. He said, human dignity remains immanently present in the professional actions of social workers. And for me, this is a really important issue, and especially in Chile, because one of the central points of the latest movements, social movements in Chile, it was a square, and the people now call that place the Dignity Square. So thank you all.
Thanks, Paula. That was really great. Thank you. She'll be in the chat for any questions, and we will move over to Chima Philip.
Right, thank you very much, Kat. My name is Chima Philip. I work in one of the London boroughs as a team manager in the looked after children's team. But I've also worked in the child protection teams for a long time as team manager and also as a social worker. And I've practiced in a lot of areas in the south of United Kingdom, mostly. So I've also practiced in Nigeria. But the difference between practicing of social work in Nigeria and the United Kingdom is that social work in Nigeria, there's no welfare system in Nigeria. There are no legislation actually that a national legislation that guides the practice of social work in Nigeria. So social work is mostly practiced within the voluntary sector. For instance, there are many motherless babies home who look after children in Nigeria. There are some organizations and other non-governmental organizations that actually work to protect children. And that is mainly because of the culture in Nigeria. The many different ethnic groups in Nigeria have different cultures that govern the way they behave, the way they live in their families. So it's actually very difficult to get one law that can protect children very much, because my area of interest is children. I work with children. So when I practiced in Nigeria, it was mostly in the voluntary sector. But in the United Kingdom, I have worked only in the statutory sector, where I have practiced in the front line myself for many years. But there's something that challenges social work in the United Kingdom is where I want to pay a little bit of attention today. It is what is called unconscious bias. This was defined by Pritlove in 2019 as the concept of, they say the concept of unconscious bias, also termed implicit bias, and is related to implicit association test, rests on the belief that people act on the basis of internalized schemas of which they are unaware of, thus can and often do engage in discriminatory behaviors without conscious intent. That means in our practices, there are certain discriminatory behaviors that we actually bring into practice, and yet we do not have any intention to be discriminatory in our practice. So I looked up the word bias is an inclination or prejudice for or against a person or a group of people, especially in a way that is considered to be unfair. Now that took me back to start looking at belief and how beliefs are formed. So beliefs are generally formed in two ways. One of the ways that belief is formed is from our experiences, from the things we come across, discussions we have with people, and the experiences we've had as individuals. And another way is by accepting what people tell us. And if you take your mind back to when you grew up in your family setting, there are certain things your parents or the professionals in your life have said to you, or relations. These things stay with us. They don't leave us, even though we're not very conscious of them. They don't leave us, they remain with us as we grow older. So most of our beliefs are formed when we were children. And these beliefs we formed as we grow older affect the way we think about ourselves and about others, and also about the world at large. Consequently, these beliefs will also go ahead and impact on actually our ability to succeed in life, because we may then develop positive beliefs or negative beliefs. So when we accept something as a fact and form a belief around that, this lives in our unconscious mind. So our subconscious mind, rather, and this subconscious mind does not really know or care if this belief we have is true or false, but it simply stores it there to use it later on in our lives. So what are beliefs? These are things we consider as fact. Is anything that we assume to be true. And sometimes what you assume to be true is completely different from what I assume as truth. So our belief dictates the possibility for us to achieve, or sometimes the difficulty in us achieving. So when we have this deeply rooted belief that we cling to subconsciously, our mind will constantly look for proof to validate and bolster these beliefs that we have. For example, if we believe that dogs are dangerous, like me, I grew up in an environment where dogs are used as for security. So I believe that dogs are dangerous. So when as a social worker, I go to visit families in the United Kingdom, I'll call them before the visit and ask them to make sure that they put their dogs away. So my belief made me to act in that way. Sometimes the families will not be happy with that request. And when I come in, one of the first things they will try to do is to coach me that dogs are not dangerous. So I've had to live with that belief. So the question is then, what are we carry these beliefs with us, and then we are practicing as social workers. The question we have to ask ourselves and answer is also, what are we then taught as social workers? We are taught to uphold the principles of anti-discriminatory practice on the basis of unique characteristics defined by law. In the United Kingdom, we have the Equality Discrimination Act, which has a list of certain categories of people who need to be protected by the law. And we also have anti-oppressive practice. We are taught to respect cultural diversities. And the question is, when we carry our beliefs that we have grown up with for so many years, because a lot of people who come into social work are actually coming as adults. So as an adult, you've carried your belief for probably 18 years or 20 years or sometimes 30 years. How do you then come in and put those beliefs aside, and all of a sudden you've become this perfect social worker? So I've gone in to look at what research says about the way we practice and the biases that we bring into our practices. In December 2020, one of the researches that was conducted was around unconscious bias. Evelyn Chafota, who works currently, I think she currently works in Bradford Child Protection Team, did a research. And she said that the study of social workers, less than 10 were homophobic, less than 10% of social workers who participated in this study were homophobic. So in a study examining social workers' decision-making in children's social care in 3 local authorities, it was found that children from non-white ethnic groups were more liable to be both referred for further action. And this is sometimes this sometimes means that these children will be progressed very, very quickly to child protection, or we can take them to court. And the reason we make those decisions are because of beliefs we hold on to, beliefs that we have grown up with, things that are sitting in our subconscious, and probably we don't remember that these beliefs are there, but we are working on the basis of these beliefs because they have formed part of who we are. Then further research also talks about the angry Black woman, or sometimes the angry Black man. You get into a conversation with a Black woman, possibly she's very, very passionate about protecting her family or defending her children or her husband, and we consider them as angry because in our subconscious, we feel that these particular people from these particular ethnic groups present as aggressive. So we color people the way we like based on some of these beliefs we carry with us. Another thing I've cited here is a recent and collaborative report from the Children's Society in the United Kingdom and Victim Support and National Police Chiefs. Say unconscious bias and racist attitude of practitioners, as well as structural inequality that caused racial motivated responses, which prevented children and young people from receiving equal and effective safeguarding from services. Now, this is actually now impacting on the way we practice, to the point where we are finding it really difficult to actually adequately protect the children or safeguard the children we work with. The final what I have here from research is sexual abuse of boys continues to be missed. In part, this arises from an unconscious bias among professionals because of a narrow consideration of the victim's characteristics. So we have made up our mind on who should be victims. We stereotype the victims of domestic sexual abuse, and also the same way we stereotype the victims of domestic violence. And the worry I have come across in my practice as a team manager in child protection teams in the UK is that when men actually say that they suffer domestic violence, we often joke about it. We don't take it very serious, but this is affecting people's lives seriously. Now the question is, how can we address this unconscious bias that we bring into work? Because we all have our different biases. We have some of us who go to church. We bring into our practice some of the biases we have from some of the things we have learned from church, from our local communities. We bring this. So how do we address these issues? First of all, we have to recognize that we have it. That unconscious bias is there. We have to recognize as an individual, I'm carrying some things in my subconscious. And I sometimes these things affect the way that I look at the cases that come to me. And as a manager, I constantly make important decisions about children and their families. And recognizing that I may have bias about information regarding the information I have in front of me is really, really important. Recognize some inherent beliefs and values and how these can actually lead to my own bias. I have beliefs, so how could my beliefs impact on my understanding of that child that I'm thinking about, or that child I have to make very important decisions about his or her life? So being able to recognize this, confront my bias. In fact, confronting it is one of the ways I can confront my bias is by looking for training programs that will enable me to understand a particular group of people that I have my bias about. Or also discussing that with my manager, enabling my manager to actually understand what my bias is, so that when I come to my manager to discuss issues, my manager will be able to question me around the bias I have and be able to go through a proper reflective exercise with me to ensure that my bias is not actually directing my practice. It can also, not just individual bias, I've also realized that there are entrenched organizational bias. And this is probably from the cultures that organizations have developed in the way they practice. What I haven't mentioned very much in my presentation is that I have special interest in domestic violence and how men can actually be able to tackle the issue of domestic violence, because a lot of time in social work, we leave women to deal with it. Because once the man who is majorly the perpetrator, most of the times, once the man leaves the scene, then we face the woman to resolve the problem. So the question is, how can we hold men accountable? How can we get them to also be part of addressing the issue of domestic violence within the family setting? So this is where I will stop today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's great. And again, Chima will be around to answer any questions or join in the chat. So now we will move over to Bridget Ng'andu, who will be talking about social work and her experiences of that within Southern Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's good to see so many countries flicking through the chat. And I saw a couple from South Africa. My name is Bridget Ng'andu. I'm a senior lecturer in social work at the University of Kent and in the United Kingdom. I originally come from Zambia. I was born in Zambia, Southern Africa, and studied at the University of Botswana. So I saw a couple of people in South Africa. Hello there, just close by. That was way back in the 1990s. And when I started social work at the time, in my final year, I became part of a group of social work students and law students, I think, at the time. And we were invited to join human rights volunteers from Ireland. And they were beginning to set up Disciplinary, which is the Center for Human Rights in Botswana. And the reason I mentioned that is it is linked to what I'll talk about later on, is that for me, there was born a passion for human rights. And it is something that's always motivated and stayed with me in social work. When I completed my studies in Botswana, I worked as personal assistant / social worker in a school, but it was a very good experience because I was coming into contact with children whose parents had either died or were affected by HIV/AIDS. So I'm very much from that era, which further led to me doing my master's degree in Australia in Perth, focusing on HIV/AIDS and volunteering, and my PhD in social policy and HIV/AIDS based on Botswana. So that's a bit of my history. My career has taken me sort of in different tangents, being a practitioner, being an academic. And I moved to the UK in 2003 and started work in a children and families team. So my background is very much children and families. But within that setting, I came across or worked with young unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people and children. And so that again reignited the passion for migrants, and in particular, asylum seekers and refugees. So my focus for this sharing this evening will concentrate on the work that I'm currently involved in. This goes back to probably 2014, 2015, when we started to see unprecedented numbers of people leaving war-torn areas and seeking asylum, seeking safety on European soil. The responses that were received were very much mixed. There were those of us who were in support of asylum seekers and refugees. There were those of us in our communities who were not. But it made me start thinking about what is social work all about? what is social work all about? And I was trying to find perhaps a community, because quite often I think as social workers, we have our day jobs, and you start at 8:30, I think here in the UK it is still, and you finish hopefully at 5, if you're lucky, probably later, but you aim to finish at 5 p.m. But there was also a sense for me that I was kind of, my practice had been kind of drilled. It was routine. And you start thinking as you probably become a practitioner for a long time, you start thinking about what is the purpose? What change can you perhaps contribute to? And so for me, 2014, 2015 was quite a period of reflection, and I reflected on those values. But it also enabled me to have contact, reach out to other practitioners. And in 2016, I found a community of social workers through Facebook, believe it or not. And we were all beginning to ask this question about, what is social work? What is social work's response to what was happening in Calais, in particular, in France? We knew there were people waiting in the unofficial camp at that time, known as the jungle. Within the camp, we had young people. So issues around safety, issues around protection came to mind. So it wasn't until September 2016 we formed a group and an organization called Social Workers Without Borders. And really our main work was started in Calais. We would travel to Calais on a monthly basis, and we started working alongside solicitors, lawyers who were trying to fight for immigration status for some of the young people. And we were asked to contribute, as social workers, the skills we have. And we realized, actually, hang on, we've got knowledge, we've got skills, we can do assessments. Yes, we're not in the UK, we're now in France, so we've crossed borders and practicing, in a country that hadn't practically invited us. So there is that whole element of social work starting, if you like, in a place where it wasn't known, and we grew from that. So Social Workers Without Borders has got 3 main strands. The first strand of our work is campaigning. We're very strong on campaigning, being explicit, but making that campaign highlight the values of social work. Examples of some of the campaigns we've done have been internationally showing solidarity with social workers in the US. People may remember when the Trump government and what was happening at the Mexican borders, we issued a statement in collaboration with SWAN, the Social Work Action Network, and other organizations in the UK to actually show solidarity with social workers in the US. We've reached out to social workers in Greece. We've recently had contact with social workers in Spain and Sweden. So what I guess I'm trying to say here is that there is a space for social work to reach out. Social work does not need to only exist in our national boundaries. Our values are international values. So when we're talking about human rights, when we're talking about social justice, when we're talking about fairness, in my view, these have got no borders. Wherever you are, if you're in South Africa today, it's the same values that we are reading about. We all subscribe to the IFSW. So there is that inherent community, international community within our values. The second strand of Social Workers Without Borders is about direct work. So I spoke a bit about the work we were doing in Calais. But since the closure of the camp in 2016, we also realized actually there are people in the UK who are affected by borders. There are people in the UK who are seeking asylum. There are people in the UK who are affected by immigration in different ways. So we've brought that work now and that experience from Calais and supporting people in the UK here. But it has also helped us actually make contact with other social workers, one which has been working across with a family, supporting a family in Yemen. So again, that just shows how, you know, how international we can go as social workers. And the last point I would say, strand of Social Workers Without Borders, is that of education. Precisely what I'm doing here today is sharing with you these experiences, but also I think giving us a hope as social workers that if we reach out, we are going to find a community that can show solidarity. But I think there is also a bigger picture there, that quite often we might feel powerless as social workers. You might have a thought, you might have a passion for something, but really not having a place or a space where you can talk about or share those experiences. And for me, as an academic, being able to, in a way, step away from my daytime role to the volunteering aspect with Social Workers Without Borders bridges that gap and gives me that opportunity to practice in this way. So the organization as it is now is primarily to support asylum seeking young people, but not just young people. We support families as well. Reunification of families is also an important aspect of our work. I wanted to probably end by linking into one of the points that was raised by the previous panelist, Chima, which is about working from anti-oppressive practice, but also I think what stood out for me was the point about stereotyping, issues around unconscious bias. And I think this also relates to how we see people of different ethnicities. That is really a big issue for me in terms of thinking about asylum seekers, refugees, issues around racism, issues around a hostile environment, one that has been, supported in some media forums here in the UK. And what that does is it stigmatizes a group of people who are seeking refuge, who are fleeing war-torn areas. Yes, they may be fleeing poverty. Perhaps the question we need to be asking ourselves is, why is there so much poverty in the world, instead of focusing on a group of people who are actually also trying to better their lives? So there are bigger questions for us as social workers. I'm aware that I've probably put in a lot of thoughts in there, so happy to take questions, but I think I will I'll leave my sharing here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. There's been a lot of interest in the chat, so if you want to pop over to the Q&A, I'm sure you can answer some questions that are in there. And now we'll be passing over to Dr. Jones Adu-Gyamfi, who will be discussing his experiences in the UK and Ghana.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and nice to be here today to share my experiences of social work practice in Ghana, and compare that slightly to the UK to help people to contextualize the differences of social work practice in Ghana and that of England. Okay, so as I said, I will look at social work education in Ghana, and then also look at some of the way it is practiced in Ghana. Social work itself, as Paula from Chile said, they had their social work developing from the 1925. Ghana, it started in 1945, and it was a colonial exportation from the UK to Ghana. Currently, qualification in social work, there's a diploma in social work, which takes 2 years. There's the BA in social work, which is 4 years. There's the MPhil social work, 2 years, and also a PhD in social work, which will take 4 years to acquire. Okay, the training is split into academic teaching and placement, similar to what we have in the UK. The difference is that in Ghana, the universities decide their own curriculum and their own placements. Because in the UK, we have Social Work England giving educational requirements, giving universities and higher educations what they must cover in their curriculum. We don't really have such a system in Ghana. So some universities have just one placement, which sometimes takes place in year 3. Others will have 2 placements, which will be in years 3 and 4. But built into the curriculum is much of internationalization. So there are a lot more international collaborations from other universities, mostly from US. So we have some of their lecturers going over to deliver visiting lectures. We have some of their students also coming over to Ghana to do their placements. So we have a number of them, so from Sweden, from Norway, and I've noted a few of the universities who do come to Ghana to have their placements. At the moment, I haven't really come across any of the UK universities sending students abroad to go and have placements. Okay. In terms of social work praxis itself in Ghana, so upon the qualification, we don't have a statutory regulatory body like we have for Social Work England here. So there's no requirement for a practitioner to register with a body. There's no licensing or registration requirement. Once you finish your training, you apply for your jobs and you start practicing. So the social worker is not really a protected title, and you actually don't need a qualification in social work to call yourself a social worker in Ghana. So you can do a degree in sociology, you can do a degree in whichever undergraduate program you have taken. The emphasis is on where you are practicing. As long as you are practicing in the social welfare field, in the development field, then you are a social worker. So you basically call yourself a social worker without a social work degree. And child protection work in Ghana really focuses on sexual abuse and severe physical abuse and that of child maintenance. Child maintenance is mostly the job of the CSA in England, the Child Support Agency. But we have social workers really being involved in settling such dispute and the neglect of parental responsibility. So with fathers, especially more of the time with fathers. I put on here that the child protection really focuses on severe physical abuse because corporal punishment is accepted in the country. So the fact that a child is smacked does not immediately trigger a child protection. It is only in cases of where it is very, very severe. Okay, so in Ghana, pretty much child protection, social work is very focused on children. We don't really have adult social care, whereby there will be care homes, there will be adult social workers. No, we don't really have that. The culture is such that families are responsible for caring for their old people. So there is a proverb that, look, your parents help you to grow your teeth. You must also look after your parents to lose their teeth. So there is this reciprocity in the system. Okay. State-sponsored foster care, it's pretty much non-existent. And when I put here state-sponsored foster care, like what we have in the UK, where there are a lot of fostering agencies, there are even local authority foster care services where they place children. A lot of the foster placement in Ghana is done private. So sometimes it's family members looking after their nephews and nieces. But that is slightly changing. There has been a new regulation. So we now have foster care regulations that was put in 2018. But it is pretty much on paper. The work in that field is not really well developed. The last time I checked, it said nationally, there are about 272 foster carers. And that is even for a country with about 30 million population, to have just 272 foster carers is pretty much small. And as I said, mainly because families are expected to provide these care. But that notwithstanding, we still have children who are in the care of the state. But a child in the care of the state is usually accommodated in children's homes. So it is very much an institutionalized system. So there are a lot of orphanages that have opened, and people place such children in the orphanages or in the state children's homes. So the state does have a number of children's homes scattered across the country that they place children. And when they are placed there, the social workers there also live on the same compound with the children who are placed there. Social workers, because there is the lack of statutory regulatory body, we don't really have statutory visits and reviews like we have in the UK, where when a child is placed in foster care, you do these visits a week or every 4 weeks and other bits. But there are still some visits that take place, but most of the time, those visits are inspection visits. So they are visits to the orphanages or to the children's homes to go and inspect how the children are doing and how they are being cared for. Okay. There are various job opportunities in Ghana for social workers. For those who work in the government sector, most of them work in the Department of Social Welfare. But majority of social work is actually led by the voluntary sector. So similar to what Chima told us. So a lot of the organizations in Ghana are non-governmental organizations or charities who are involved in HIV projects. There will be girl child education. So something like the Sponsor a Child, Action Aid, or Plan International. Social workers are involved in providing development projects, so community development, water systems, shelter for abused women, or refugee issues. Those who work in the NGOs tend to have better pay and conditions than those who work in the government sector. But then again, those who work in the government sector have better job security than in the NGOs, because in the NGOs is donor funded and is sometimes is on contract. So once the funding for the project ends, then you lose your job unless you get other funding. So there's better job security in the government sector, and also much more relaxing environment for social workers, because we don't really have these statutory timelines and statutory visits. Social work practice is much more relaxing. We don't have that much pressure, but there are still some challenges, and especially with the under-resourced department for social welfare, because children's social work really costs a lot of money. Because if you look at all the local authorities in the UK, look at the number of social workers, look at the number of foster carers, it costs a lot of money. And the governments say, well, they haven't really got that much money. So it is under-resourced. And because it's under-resourced, sometimes some professionals end up using their own money for visits, and they have to use your own money to go out to visits. Then we don't really do a lot of such visits. And even where such visits are done, it compromises the supervisory work that we have to do. But when you go out on the visit to go and see these non-governmental organizations, sometimes they will give you a nice brown envelope as your travel cost. And if you visit an NGO that keeps giving you nice brown envelopes, you are likely not to give them negative reports. Because if you give them negative reports and they don't really cooperate well, next time you will get opportunity to go there. Families, some of the challenges also is that families tend to settle a lot of cases at home. They don't really refer cases that they should actually refer to social work, because they will say they want to protect the family, the dignity of the family, or the dignity of the child, or even or the professional or the person involved. So even though the departments are under-resourced, because families are settling a lot of the cases at home and they are not really making those referrals, it's a challenge. And the final thing there is social work is very much unregulated in the country. Is not that well known in the country, but efforts are being made to professionalize it. There is the Ghana Association of Social Workers. They're doing a lot of advocacy work to formalize or professionalize social work, but that is also without its challenges. There are also a number of challenges there. So notwithstanding these challenges, it is, as I said, very varied work that people do, especially for those involved in the NGOs, going out, visiting such different communities, providing a service to them. So in a nutshell, this is briefly my experience with social work practice in Ghana and how that compares to that of UK social work. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. That was absolutely fantastic. We have lots of comments in the chat on things that you've said, so I'm sure you'll enjoy reading those and replying to some, and we have some very specific questions for you in the Q&A, so if you want to head over there, I think people would love to hear more, so that is fantastic. Thank you so much. So next up we have Augusta Olaore, who is, I believe, he's going to speak about the social work in Nigeria, but you're based in the US, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about. That seems like a really interesting mix. So over to you, Augusta. Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm so excited to be here to share. Yes, I'm a native of Nigeria, and my first social work exposure was when I came to the United States in 1993. Prior to that, I had no idea of what social work was all about. And that just stands on all that Chima had said and all that Dr. Jones had said, put all of that together to give you the picture of Nigeria when it comes to social work practice. So it is also very developmental in its, and we have lots of Western influences. So we had to borrow a lot of, Western philosophy, influences and practice, and to actually celebrate indigenous social work, okay, because of the colonial mentality that we call it, because in Nigeria, what is usually prevalent is whatever comes from the Western world, what comes from Europe, what comes from America is the best and the final say. So sometimes the indigenous practices are downplayed, which was reflected even in the language. In Nigeria, at some point, people will be penalized for speaking their indigenous languages. Like, I am a Yoruba lady and I would go to school. If I should say something in Yoruba, I'm going to be penalized because English is the way to go. Until recently, when all of that is changing, and that has informed a lot of stuff. So my own journey, in the social work profession started from, when I became introduced into it. I had the passion for people, but I had my first degree in agriculture. And at some point I was like, no, I am not going to be working with plants and animals. I want to talk to people and empower people. And I got to know about social work being everything that I've always wanted to be. So my training started in the United States, where I got my master's in social work from the University of Los Angeles, UCLA. And then my doctorate was from South Africa, UNISA, University of South Africa in Pretoria. So, and I've had, my foot somehow in the UK in terms of my A levels, actually. So I can say that part of my education also comes from the United Kingdom, where I went to school in Surrey. So in 2006, I went back to Nigeria from the US to actually practice social work. And I had the task of working as the first director of the Student Support Center at a faith-based university, where I had to practice and coordinate the services of social workers and counselors. Along with doing that, don't ask me how, but I did that for 12 years. I was also the chair of the Department of Social Work that was non-existent. So it was my job to develop a whole department of social work. And we had our first students in 2009, 7 of them, but over the years, the department has grown, and I've had to do a lot of international student exchange as part of developing the program. So we've had students who would go from Nigeria to the United States for their 1 semester of exposure of placement. And we've had that MOU with a university in Georgia. And we just also got a grant to support students to come to Europe, actually, University of Hertfordshire, where they can also mingle and have knowledge transfer, both for students and faculty. So I'm very excited about those opportunities to develop the social work education in Nigeria. So I will say to Chima, things are kind of looking up and better than it used to be. So I would also say that working in a faith-based university, in my role as the director, I had to deal with people that you would call minors, because they were actually age 16. That is the minimum age entry into university. And they were minors in adult environments. Okay, so just note that. Plus,
institution is heavily funded by family and community compared to what we have in the United States. In the United States, I don't know about the UK when it comes to post-secondary education. In the US, there's a lot of student loans. There's a lot of financial aid. We don't have that in Nigeria. So if you go to school, you're coming out of pocket. It is family or community that is sustaining you. So that is the introduction to the Nigerian context in which I worked as a practitioner and an educator. So when I was in the Student Support Center, what are the kind of issues that came up for us that we had to deal with? In my capacity, issues of funding, okay, and issues of welfare and upkeep and disciplinary issues. Okay, so we had students who could not afford to be in that school, though it was preferred as a private university because most public universities were issues were going on in terms of strikes and boycotts, and so a 4-degree program could go on for 7 years or 8 years, you know, so people preferred private, but it was also expensive. So when it came to disciplinary issues and welfare, what are the things that we had to deal with in Nigeria? One major issue was issues of sexual behavior, misbehaviors, infractions, and sexual orientation. Now, for me, coming from the United States background, coming into a place where having a different, a homosexual sexual orientation has no word, actually, in my language. It is criminalized. And we had students, young people, who were dealing with those issues. It is actually something that was breaking the school rules, you know, and we had to deal with that. And I'm going to talk about that later. Issues of substance abuse. Up until the time I got there, there was no procedure, no protocol, nothing about substance abuse. It existed, but there was no structure for services. So I had to put that in place in what to do about that. Academic challenges, and so on and so forth. Now, how does the issue of the village mentality, I'm rushing through this. I started my presentation with, we always talk about it takes a village to raise a child. So what should the village know when it comes to operationalizing issues of confidentiality in an African setting, especially in the Nigerian setting? So one thing that I had to deal with and help people understand is that it's not just about talking about extended family. When you're in Nigeria, you're talking about extensive family, okay? And then you have clans, you have neighbors who are like family, okay? And you could have somebody that is being referred to as a father, but they are just because they are close neighbors. And that bond is as strong as blood ties. And these are the things that we had to deal with. We also had to deal with the issue of knowing that is beyond being informed, you know, like the way you would do your assessment, okay? We have spiritual ways of knowing, you know, where a person can say that, oh yeah, I know there's something going on because I saw a vision, or my priest or my pastor revealed it to me, okay? And you as a social worker, we're like, okay, how do we handle this? I'm moving right along to say that the issue of confidentiality and knowing how to include the community has been a challenge and something that we're working with. I will give you some very quick case scenarios, okay? We had a situation of a teenager who got pregnant, okay, as a student, left home, came to school, but was pregnant. And instead of going on campus in the residence, took an apartment off campus. So we came to, because she was also academically challenged. Now, when this student came to us, we were like, who do we talk to? And he's like, don't talk to my mother. My mother has a heart condition. Talk to my pastor and the prayer warriors that work with her. By the time we were going to talk with the pastor and the prayer warriors, the pastor said, yes, God already revealed it to us that she was having the problem. And it's like, okay, So you are now going to help us in preparing the mother to receive this news about the child being pregnant and having a baby. So that is how we had to work that. Or we've had to deal with a situation where a student got into trouble for substance abuse, and we needed a parent. And here he comes to the office and says, "Oh, this is my father." Now, I started talking and noticed that the names were different. The last name was different from his name. And I'm like, so what is the relationship? And he now came and said, actually, I am not the biological father. I am his sponsor, I'm his neighbor, but I've been supporting the family and I'm like a father to him. So ethically, what do we do? Do we give him information about this student? He is a financial parent, though not a biological parent, and we had to work all of that, you know. Or the case of Mambo, who was suicidal, and she had actually attempted suicide, and when her case came to us because we needed to inform the parents. So the name of the parent she gave us was different. The mother, we called her mother on file, and her mother was like, no, I am not aware that my child is suicidal. She didn't, you know, I didn't have a problem with her, because what Mambo said was that the reason why I attempted suicide was because I was accused of something at home and it was very shameful for me. Only to discover that she lived with someone else who was a caregiver, and she saw as a mother, that mother was the one who accused her. And we now had to juggle, so which mother are we going to release information to? So these are practice issues that when you are in the Nigerian setting, you've got to be able to clarify how much information, you know, the National Association of Social Workers in the United States, they would say you give the least information, you know, you give, yeah, I was going to share that, where it says that you give, in all instances, social workers should disclose the least amount of confidential information necessary to achieve the desired purpose. The global ethics is different. It also says, you know, the next slide shows how the global social work ethics says the we-centered communication living, social workers respect and abide by the people's right and choice of shared confidentiality. So if you are going to practice in the international arena, you are juggling between this, you know, the communal living, how much information on by need basis, people who feel they have a right to know, you know, and the client's right to self-determination. You know, you have to work with all of this. So I have just opened a kind of worms, you know, for us to talk about, but these are the realities of working, you know, especially when it comes to children, when it comes to young people in the Nigerian environment, the issue of confidentiality, especially when we don't have guidelines, like Dr. Jones was saying, no guidelines, nothing. So as a social worker, you need to be able to think on your feet and, you know how to bring everybody in. So I'm going to stop there, you know, for now for questions, but these are the realities, and these are some of the things that I have had to deal with, you know, coming from an international background and bringing in those universal concepts, but operationalizing it in a local context. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, thank you, Augusta. That, again, absolutely fantastic. And I think you're right. There are lots of questions in the chat, lots of things in the Q&A. People definitely want to know more. And I've got a feeling that of all of our speakers, you may be coming back because people are just asking so many questions. So we may end up doing a part 2 of this international webinar, which is fantastic. So I'm hoping that you're going to head over to the Q&A and head over to the chat, because people do want to know more. So next up we have Greg Reardon, who is practicing in Australia. So we are very grateful that you've joined us. especially because of the time difference. So so I'm going to put myself on mute and hand over to Greg, who will be our last speaker. Thank you, Greg.
Hello, good morning everyone, or good evening where you are. If I sound a little bit hazy, it's because it's very early. But thank you so much, and happy belated Social Work Day and happy Social Work Month as well. Amazing to be here. But first and foremost, I would like to just acknowledge that I am speaking on Wotherong land today. And I would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And you're probably wondering, why am I doing an acknowledgement to country? Well, probably because a lot of here in Australia, there is a very large indigenous culture, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here. So there is a map on the next slide where Australia is broken up into different denominations and mobs and clans. So, you know, it's very important to understand the cultural context of where you are working as well. In Australia, as England, unfortunately, you have a really poor background and history with Australia, especially when it comes to the First Fleet back in the 1700s and the invasion of Australia. And actually, child protection have a real poor name when it considered removing children from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and placing them into white families because it was perceived as that white parenting was better, but it actually wasn't. And it's actually real false, poor misconception. So that's how I'm going to open up my meeting today. And I'm going to put a link in the chat if you want to learn more about the deadly story. Then I would really definitely go and read more. But who am I? Who am I? I'm Greg Reardon. I graduated from the University of Northampton in 2014. I've held many roles in England in child safeguarding since completing my degree. A real big shout out to Warwickshire County Council, where I spent the majority of my career before moving to Australia in 2019. I'm currently working as a senior child protection practitioner and practice supervisor for the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing, which is a bit unusual to put that housing in there, but that's the way they manage it here. So when I first came and asked to do this webinar, I started thinking about, the global definition of social work. And the global definition is obviously social work is a practice-based profession, and it's an academic discipline that promotes social change, development, social cohesion, empowerment, liberation of people, and defined by social justice and human rights, and respecting diversities and the essential to social work. And then it got me wondering here in Australia, the definition in Australia. So the AASW, who is the Australian Association of Social Workers, also see social work as a practice-based profession, an academic discipline that promotes social change and development, social cohesion and the empowerment and liberation of people, principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, respect for diversities, and are central to social work. So that really does coincide, you know, with the global definition. And it's very common here in Australia, particularly Victoria, where I work, that social workers are in all kinds of different settings. Mainly, these are a few, but not limited to, schools, healthcare providers, prisons, family support services, family violence services, so domestic violence services, drug and alcohol, and also within the courts, and the list is endless. I was quite taken back by how social work really branches out into loads of different agencies, especially schools, as it's very uncommon where I worked in the UK for social workers to be in schools. So it's also very much welcomed, really, because there's almost like a common language and a common thread. So I wanted to go through some of the good things here in Australia, and one of the things that I think they've got really down pat, but also some of the things that I've found most challenging and some of the real difficult things. I guess family group conferencing from a child protection perspective, which I'm going to be talking from, is probably very key here in Australia at different points in the child protection process, at the start of investigation to a protective intervention, and also within the court system as well. There's a big emphasis on family group conferencing. So there's a big emphasis on empowering families to make decisions and come up with plans for themselves that support the development, safety and well-being of children as well. It's a massive, it's actually in legislation that Aboriginal families and Torres Strait Islander families are that family group conferencing is essential to their care package as well. And the reasons for that is because it's inclusive, it's respectful, and it also brings about the family's culture and identity right to the forefront of the table as well. And within these family group conferencing, we cannot, especially working with Indigenous people, we cannot present these meetings without an elder or someone from their community who is knowledgeable within their culture. It's actually against our practice to be able to do that, and so therefore it is really important that family group conferencing is really the central part of our work, really. And actually the results of family group conferencing is that it actually produces better outcomes for children and young people and their families, and actually research has actually shown that as well. So you've probably seen this a little bit. There's a big kind of emphasis on restorative practice, with high support and high challenge. It's actually doing it with the families here in Australia. It's not about doing it against them. So there's a big shift on restorative practice here. And again, I guess you guys have probably seen this in training as well in the past. Especially if you've been in training with Siobhan before, she really does highlight this a lot. And actually, we don't want to be doing it for families. We don't want to be doing it to families, because we'll be doing it for them and they're not learning. And actually, if you're doing it to them, it actually is quite punitive and draconian. So in Australia, there's a high emphasis on with. There's also a big emphasis on relationship-based practice and direct work with children as well. So always social work tools and social work toolkits are being highly developed here within Australia. It's actually one of the practice guidelines here in Victoria that direct work and relationship-based practice is essential to building good relationships with children, young people and their families. And it enables to make a more informed assessment and makes effective casework as well. So it is very important that when we are building up relationship-based practice, that we are really looking at the trauma base, or you know, looking at that trauma and how we can support families to overcome and manage that trauma. And also, if we feel listened to and validated, then we are more likely to get a positive outcome for children and their families. And that's especially central to working with Aboriginal families as well, given that the historical context of what we are working in is obviously quite damaging. It's quite scary for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families to come into contact with child protection, given our historical context. And that's why I gave the link for you to read more. So if you came to Australia, the reasons why Aboriginal families and Torres Strait Islander families might actually go, I don't want to talk to you. And there's an absolute reason why they do not. But I did come across a few challenges and a few unusual things. So child protection is not actually a social work job. In Australia, child protection particularly is not regulated externally by the AASW. So it's not regulated by the Australian Association of Social Workers, or an independent regulator as like Social Work England or the HCPC previously. And so therefore it is done internally. So child protection is regulated and managed by the general government. And I guess that creates different problems as well, and can be quite problematic. Child protection can also be undertaken by anyone who holds a recognised social work degree, but also it can be undertaken by anyone with a similar welfare or behavioural related degree, or a diploma in community services work, or similar qualifications, including people with psychology degrees as well. So I've got many colleagues who work in child protection, who have just got psychology degrees. And it makes the family assessment very broad and very vast, and depending on their education, and depending on you know, the social work education that you've had, you know, it can be very vast, and the conversations can be very interesting as well that you have, especially if you run into a situation where it's not person-centered and not restorative as well. So it can be quite heated as well, and sometimes you can butt heads as well, which is expected as well, and it is quite healthy, but actually sometimes it could be quite difficult for families. This one was a very particular challenge to me. So when you are doing a child protection investigation, you are looking at substantiation and responsible for harm. So if anyone who's worked in child protection, you are in the UK, you are doing a holistic assessment, and you are looking at what supports the family needs and what area, whether it be child in need, child protection. But here in Australia, we're actually looking at as well what supports they need, but actually where does the substantiation lie, and who is responsible for harm? Is it the mother? Is it the father? Is it the uncle? And actually that actually goes on a system, and it's actually a little red flag that actually marks this person is responsible for harm, and these are the reasons why. And it can be to failure to protect, cause harm, or likely to cause harm. So it's about ensuring that that is recorded. And yeah, I can imagine that could be quite shocking for a lot of families when you're giving them that news. The other most shocking thing that I came to Australia were protection applications. Now, in England, obviously you have to go to court first before a child is removed from parental care. or have to get a judge's permission, whether that would be for an emergency protection order. In Australia, you don't need to do that, especially here in Victoria. So in Victoria, you can give a family, a team manager can make a decision that a protection application by emergency care is warranted and it reaches the threshold, and that you can remove that child from a parent's care instantly. So you could be out in the field just doing a visit and it's all going a bit pear-shaped, and your team manager makes a decision, actually we need to remove these children, and literally it's a little A4 sheet of paper, and you just give it to the family and we'll be in court in 24 hours. The by notice on the side is the protection application by notice, is because in Australia you can only work with a family voluntarily for 90 days. And after that, if you are not making any progress with a voluntary plan in 90 days, then you have to get the permission from the court to actually work with the family for longer. There's a few other things here that I found interesting in Australia as well. So the courtroom here in the UK, it's a closed court, but here in Australia, it's an open court. Therefore, the public can come in and watch child and family matters, unless the magistrate makes a decision that to close the court, and these are particularly prevalent with sexual abuse cases. I was particularly shocked around the focus on proving and disproving protective concerns, and not really much focus on family assessment of what support they needed. There was a very much emphasis on to provide support, we need to understand who is responsible here. In the UK, you know, obviously the reporter is not allowed to be shared here in Australia. So if you get a report and the parent asks you, well, who made the report? You can't say. By law, you cannot share. So if it was the school who's made a report, you can't say, oh, the school. You know, in the UK, you can. But here in Australia, you cannot. And then from the age of 12 years old, a child, regardless of their cognitive ability or age, a child can be provided with full court documentation as well. They could be told everything about their family. So that's really my real whistle-stop tour of Australia. You're probably going, what? But I'm happy to take questions to obviously help you guys out. But thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Greg. I think you're right. There are a lot of people going what different points, so I would encourage you to jump into the Q&A. We definitely have a question for you there, and lots of people asking in the chat, so I'll leave you to look at that. And that is it. That's our fantastic international social work webinar. I'm going to hand over to team member Diana, who has been keeping a very close eye on the chat and will speak to us for just a minute longer, and then we will close the webinar. Numbers have stayed high all evening, which is fantastic. People are absolutely glued to the presenters. So Diana, over to you.
Hi everyone. Yeah, the chat has been buzzing all the way through. I feel like so many people were able to connect to this webinar because we do have a very wide international kind of viewing, and I think that was great. We had a lot of people from South Africa, a lot of people from different parts of the world and the country, but you can really tell that people are intrigued and they want to know more about the international world of social work. So I think this was able to give them that insight, and you could tell that there was a lot of questions in there, and there was a lot of informative reflections. And I think we definitely need another webinar, because this was just incredible. Everyone loved each of the speakers and different things were brought up. And I guess someone did say about the cultural importance. That was a key theme, like the culture, understanding culture, indigenous knowledge, and valuing that. That was the things that stood out for me.
Fantastic. Yep. I love the way you summarise the chat, Diana. You managed to say what everybody is saying in a really short few sentences, so thank you for that. We do value that. So the link for next week has just gone into the chat. I can see that Dave has just popped that in. And the webinar next week is Sherrington, and Debbie Greaves is coming back to us to do part 2 of her webinar, another guest where you guys just wanted more. So Wednesday 24th of March is Sherrington with Debbie Greaves. The link is in the chat. Then on the 31st of March, we have essay writing. We don't have guest speakers, we just have the team, and we do know a lot about essay writing because sometimes it feels like that's all we do. So essay writing on the 31st of March, and on the 7th of April, we have a fantastic webinar with Ben Ashcroft, who is going to speak to us about his own personal experiences. So we have 3 fantastic webinars there. The next webinar link is going into the chat, and I think that's it from all of us. So we're going to say goodbye and we're going to wave you off, and we'll see you next week. Thanks everybody. So Diana, over to you.
Hi everyone. Yeah, the chat has been buzzing all the way through. I feel like so many people were able to connect to this webinar because we do have a very wide international kind of viewing, and I think that was great. We had a lot of people from South Africa, a lot of people from different parts of the world and the country, but you can really tell that people are intrigued and they want to know more about the international world of social work. So I think this was able to give them that insight, and you could tell that there was a lot of questions in there and there was a lot of informative reflections, and I think we definitely need another webinar, because this was just incredible. Everyone loved each of the speakers and different things were brought up, and I guess someone did say about the cultural importance. That was a key theme, like the culture, understanding culture, indigenous knowledge, and valuing that. That was the things that stood out for me.
Fantastic. Yep. I love the way you summarise the chat, Diana. You managed to say what everybody is saying in a really short few sentences, so thank you for that. We do value that. So the link for next week has just gone into the chat. I can see that Dave has just popped that in. And the webinar next week is Sherrington, and Debbie Greaves is coming back to us to do part 2 of her webinar, another guest where you guys just wanted more. So Wednesday 24th of March is Sherrington with Debbie Greaves. The link is in the chat. Then on the 31st of March, we have essay writing. We don't have guest speakers, we just have the team, and we do know a lot about essay writing because sometimes it feels like that's all we do. So essay writing on the 31st of March, and on the 7th of April, we have a fantastic webinar with Ben Ashcroft, who is going to speak to us about his own personal experiences. So we have 3 fantastic webinars there. The next webinar link is going into the chat, and I think that's it from all of us. So we're going to say goodbye and we're going to wave you off, and we'll see you next week. Thanks everybody.